Welcome to the Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I am humbled and honored to be in the virtual studio with Kay Pfleghardt. Kay is a financial advisor out of Rochester, New York. We met, a little over 3 years ago, and now we're in the same study group, holding each other accountable and growing alongside one another. Kay's journey in financial planning started after witnessing her dad navigate the intricacies of her grandmother's estate, only to be thrusted into a logistical and emotional roller coaster of watching her dad's illness deteriorate him over the final 11 years of his life. Her grief journey taught Kay that grief isn't about pain. There's also fog, learning, and the constant challenge of figuring out how to keep living while carrying your someone with you throughout life. Kay, thank you so much for joining me on the Currency of Grief podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
So besides me begging and pleading and sending you text messages at weird hours of the night, what made you want to come on the podcast and share your story?
Yeah, so the person who really convinced me, a friend of both of ours, John, also an advisor that is in our study group, I listen to podcasts like this all the time, and I did before my father's passing, and I still do today. What I had feared is that my story may be a little bit too boring, and John sat me down and said, "Okay, your story feels boring because you went through it and you experienced it, but hearing it for other people could be very helpful." So that is why I'm here today.
Amazing. And John's a big friend and advocate of the podcast, so I'm grateful he convinced you. And obviously, you've listened to a couple of episodes, so here on the Currency of Grief, we don't hold back. We dive right into the real stuff. And so, Kay, tell us a little bit about your grief story.
Sure. So I'll start with my grandmother's passing and what that experience brought. So when I was 16, I had my first real job. I was working at a grocery store as a cashier. I got my first paycheck and found out at that point in time that means you need to open a bank account. So I went to the nearest federal credit union, went to open that bank account, and the woman at the cashier's register brought me back to her manager's office, and they sat me down and they said, "Hi, sweetie, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but we can't open a bank account for you today. Are you aware that you have a $347,000 tax lien in your name?" And I did not know what that meant. I believe my specific words to the bank teller, I believe they were something to the effect of, "I've never seen this much money in my life. There is no way that I owe this, and I don't know what this means." They printed out a stack of papers for me. They sent me home with it. I very explicitly remember slapping it on the stainless steel kitchen table in front of my mom and saying something to the effect of, "What is this about?" And my mom said, "I have no idea. Let's wait until your dad gets home." And my dad came home and quickly pointed out that the social security number that was on all of the reports was not mine. It was my grandmother's, who had passed away a few years earlier. So I'm not really sure how that mess up at the bank's office happened. I do know I'm named after my grandmother, so my full name is Kay. That was my grandmother's nickname. So that was kind of my first entry into the whole estate issue, family dynamic complexity world. And from there, the story, it just ensues.
And so how did the Lien get into your name?
Yeah, so the lien was never in my name. Luckily, that was a discrepancy between the bank tellers. But the fact of the matter is my grandmother did have a tax lien assessed against her. Something generationally at that time, at least commonly, not always, is one of the spouses would run the finances in a household for my grandmother and my grandfather. They lived in Queens, New York. That was the case for them. My grandfather had passed away 4 years before my grandmother did. At that point in time, my dad and my grandmother, my dad being that grandmother's son, were in quite a bit of a rift about finances and who was going to control them. And there was a lot of issues with the passing of the reins with that. And a part of what occurred behind the scenes, and I was far too young to understand what was going on, but what occurred was my grandmother never filed her taxes. So for 4 years before she passed, she did not file a tax return, including the year that my grandfather passed away. And when you file a tax return when someone passes away between two spouses, what you're effectively telling the IRS is, yes, this money has moved hands, but it is going from spouse to spouse. It is mostly not a taxable event, just from that specific transfer there. Because it was never reported to the IRS saw it as income to my grandmother that she had never reported at the time.
Okay. Yeah, that's crazy. And then, so it sounds like there wasn't really a plan for the passing of the reins of who was going to take over financial responsibilities after your grandfather passed. And then what ended up, what role did your dad play and what ended up happening in his life, in his world?
So one of the frustrations that our family experienced with my dad's personality and his own personal coping mechanisms, he had the tendency to ignore when problems existed. And you'll hear that in the story that I'll tell you today in a variety of areas of his life. But when that issue came up, instead of taking care of it and reporting and going back and filing amended tax returns and working through the issue, instead he just put it off, and the issue compounded and compounded for years to come.
Wow. And then when did he get sick?
So he got sick. It's hard to say. It was his early 50s was when the doctors first started asking him to monitor his blood sugar, and he refused to do that. That was the old school days of having to do the finger prick daily, check your blood sugar, act accordingly, take your medications. And just as I alluded to earlier, he took that thought process of, well, if I just ignore the problem, it doesn't exist. So he started getting sick in his early 50s. And then over the course of the next 11 years, that diabetes, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it went all the way to the end in all of the physical ailment issues that you can imagine, and I'm sure we'll talk about those. So he was sick for quite a while.
Yeah. What type of physical ailments, and then what ended up happening? Like, how did like, if for someone who doesn't know type 2 diabetes, like, how does it, for lack of a better term, metastasize and take over your life?
Sure. So in the early years, something we didn't know that was happening with those blood sugar spikes happen. A lot of mood swings will occur from those. So tons of mood swings at one point in time, on and off, various points in time, I suppose I should say. He was diagnosed with depression, manic depression at times. So that was in the early years. In those early years, my mother and my father chose to split to part ways, which brought a lot of chaos to our family. And as the years progressed, he started to develop various sores around his body, and those sores would not heal, primarily in his feet. So for a very long time, possibly since his late 30s and mid 40s, he had neuropathy in his feet, meaning that you cannot feel your feet. So he would get these massive sores on his feet, and they would not heal. And he would, I'm sorry, it's gross to say, but he would throw socks and shoes on and go about his day and ignore the problem until he started to feel very, very sick. He would end up at the hospital. They would tell him, you have a blood infection. After a few years of that, the amputations started. So first with toes, and from the time that the amputations started, that is when his ability to cope with everything going on just entirely went away. So at that point in time, I was 18 or 19. So I was in college. My siblings were out of college, off on their own, doing their own things. Still trying to take care of dad as best we could, but very quickly the dynamic in the relationship changed from my dad being the parental figure to us three siblings becoming those parental figures. My mom got back involved to help us as well. And my dad really becoming, I don't want to say a child, but kind of leaving the reins of that parental figure open.
Yeah. Not being the caregiver, but being the care receiver of basically the you and your siblings and your mom.
Yeah. And I do recall during that time something very, very specific that came into play with those amputations. The biggest fear he had was losing his legs. There was a point in time, I was in college, and it was a very important volleyball game for me. I believe it was the game that I had hit 1,000 kills, which is a career record for our college. And my dad was adamant that he was going to make it to this game. He was always my absolute biggest fan when it came to volleyball and really any sports or endeavors that I pursued. But I do remember he made it up to that game. He had begged a friend to drive him. He could no longer drive. His eyes had metastasized, so he was starting to go blind at that point. And immediately after the game, he started to kind of collapse. And on the way home, they brought him to the emergency room. And we did not hear from him for about a week. And what was happening was he had been transported up to, I believe it's Cayuga Medical Center up in Ithaca, New York. And they did take his first leg. So that was where his health issues really started to take over his life. And I know I'm not alone in saying this. Me and my three siblings have a ton of regret and remorse over not being there for him during that time. And that still sits with me, at least today. So
yeah. Talk about the character. So like, where were your siblings, and what was your dad like? As you mentioned, he like always wanted to be there for this game where you had this amazing accomplishment as a volleyball player of getting 1,000 kills. What what was he like as in your childhood growing up, and where were your siblings at that time?
Sure. So when we look back at who my dad was growing up, he was the best dad. So many areas of his life fell apart, and he did not take care of those areas. But as a father, that was all he wanted to be. And he was. So he's one of those typical, hey, my dad has never missed a sports game. And that was true all through our high school careers, through my sister's college careers, much of her cross country matches he would make drives to. We would go to them and travel and see her. That portion started to fall off when I did get to college because of his health issues. He really just could not travel the way that he wanted to. But he made sure that we had, my sister and I both had horses growing up in different formats after he learned on the first go that having a horse in your own backyard is not ideal. So I got my horse, but my horse stayed at the show barn. And he was just super supportive and involved with everything. So he was the parent that when we got home from school, the rule was we sit down at the kitchen table and finish our homework before we can go out and play with friends. And if we have an average below 90 out of 100, we're grounded. Um, I never got grounded, so I don't know if that was actually true or just a threat.
Such an overachiever.
Yeah, exactly. My siblings, my sister is 8 years older than me. My brother is 6 years, and if you ask my sister, she's 7 to 8 years older than me. But both just stellar human beings. My sister, at the time of my dad getting very sick, she had graduated from college. She was working as a speech pathologist in Rochester. She actually made a pretty big leap and left that career to become a full-time RVer with her now husband. So at the time of his illness, I know, and I don't want to speak for her, but I know one of the things that she has shared that she struggled with was, I'm traveling the country. I want to live my life, but I've got our dad who's asking me to kind of come back and sit with him and be in this mess that is almost self-created. And then my brother, unfortunately for him, he was living at home, but also trying to navigate that, hey, I'm trying to experience my own life. I can't take you everywhere that you want to go whenever you want to go to an appointment or a meeting or anything like that. So they were navigating life just the same as me, trying to figure out what's an appropriate use of time to support him and what's not.
Yeah. So it sounds like in taking on that caregiver role for all of you, there was an element of, hey, we want to experience our own life, but we also want to be there for our dad. And it was 11 years of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was about 11 years. He was on dialysis for the last 5 years of that, and dialysis is where his lifestyle really, really became cut off. He could not do at-home dialysis because of his blindness, and to be frank, his ability to stay hygienic at home really had us worried. So he had to go to dialysis 3 times a week, and in typical my dad fashion, he chose to go for the 5 a.m. appointments. So he would go Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Typically, that schedule would shift slightly. But his hope was that once he got out of dialysis for the day, which was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he would have energy to hang out with his friends. He was living in a community center at that point in time. And he was the most popular man on campus, he will say.
That's amazing. That's good to hear. What was your dad's name?
Mike, Mr.
Mike,
P.
Mr. P. I love it. And so when your dad eventually did pass away, what was the hardest thing that you had to do immediately after your dad died? Do you remember those first steps and decisions?
I do. So my dad passed away on a Friday morning. Just a little bit of background on this. So he chose to end dialysis. His health got to the point where they wanted to take him, he had had a stroke, and they wanted to take him from the nursing home to the dialysis center via stretcher and ambulance 3 times a week with a cost of about $15,000 a week out of pocket for that. At that point in time, on that first Saturday, was the first day they wanted to do that, he called my sister and then myself, claiming that dialysis did not come to pick him up. And then my sister got a call from the dialysis center saying that my dad refused to go, which was followed by, I don't remember if my sister called him or he called her, and he said, I don't want to do this anymore. So that Saturday, we all called each other from all the various locations that we were. I was up in Rochester, New York, which is about a 2-hour drive home. My brother was in our hometown, and my sister, I apologize, I don't remember where in the country she was, but she said, I'm on my way back. So from Monday up through Friday, we actually had the pleasure of sitting in the hospice center with him, going through some really, really nice things together. That Friday, getting to your question, We were just about to head out to go hang out with him for the day, and we got a call from the nursing home, the hospice center, saying that your dad passed away. He was awake and with it at 5:30 this morning, and we just went in to check on him. It was about 7:15, and he's passed away. And I was sitting in my mom's kitchen with my sister as she got the call, and as soon as she got the call, I knew exactly what it was about. And there was a sense of calm and silence and awkwardness between us all, not in a bad way, like together in awkwardness. But I think the hardest part with that day was they gave us the option to go see him before they picked him up for the funeral home, which isn't always an option that people get. And we said, we'll be there. So we made a car ride over. It was about a 40-minute drive over. And I have to share this story because it's so my dad. There's a song called You Can Call Me Al. If you don't know it, listen to it after this. It's the most ridiculous song, and it was stuck in my head, and it was one of his favorite songs, but I would call it like a party, a vacation song. And it was stuck in my head, and I blurted out in the backseat. I said, I don't know why this is so inappropriate, but You Can Call Me Al is stuck in my head right now as I'm on the way to go see my deceased father. So right then and there, my sister did not react, and I was like, we are not handling this first day in the same format, and that I did not expect. Mm-hmm. But truly the most difficult moments, my sister and I chose to go into the room, and we wanted to make sure that he was dressed appropriately for the funeral home. That is what he would have wanted. So the nurses luckily helped us dress him. We put him in, I believe it was his Gumby button-up shirt, so like Gumby the cartoon. And then we put his childhood teddy bear in his arms and had him go to the funeral home with that teddy bear. That teddy bear was one that he came over when he was adopted from Italy. When he came over on the boat, he was given that teddy bear, and it stayed with him ever since. So that right there, it was a quite difficult process, mostly because I don't do well in hospital settings. I don't like medical things. It was the first time that I really come in contact with a deceased body. But the other difficult part was seeing how wounded his body was. He had stitches all on the inside of his legs from some various heart procedures that he had had at a point in time. Mm-hmm. He was missing most of one leg and almost all of the other foot. He had sores on his body, and just seeing like someone go through that level of physical sickness and pain and still be like, we used to call him our family radio. He would always call us, share stories, and really kept us connected. That was hard.
Yeah, it sounds really hard. It sounds like the whole day was hard, and the way you coped wasn't the same way that other people coped as well. So talk a little bit about that. How did you cope? What felt right for you? And who gave you support in the aftermath of your dad's passing?
Yeah. So I still do to this day, and I did back then too. I cope with a bit of humor. I've talked to my therapists about this before. That is what they see as a response because you don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. But for me, I believe it comes from not wanting to feel uncomfortable myself. So really, the first day, I truly don't remember how I coped specifically. We went home back to his house, the one that he had lived in before he moved into the community center. So my brother was living in that house at that time. And I don't know why, but we decided, you know what, we're all in town for a few more days. So now is the time that we need to go through his stuff and start deciding what we're going to keep and what we're going to get rid of. So I don't know if that's a coping mechanism to choose to get things done. But we went through, yeah,
definitely very common.
Yeah, so we went through a ton of his stuff. I should admit, and he knows this wherever he is already, there is a specific silverware set that I was not supposed to see. He wanted me to have it on my wedding date, which is yet to be determined. And when we were going through the stuff, I may or may not have accidentally found it. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's definitely super common to go through. Well, it's not uncommon to have like in have humor as part of the coping mechanism. I think it's life, and part of life is laughter and also death. And if that's the way that you're able to feel comfortable, um, it's it's part of the process. But also other people may be at different stages of the process, so it may be like, why is Kay laughing at this joke when like everybody should be sad? And I think the big thing about grief, and especially in those really trying moments, is that, feel whatever you want to feel. Screw everybody else. Like, nobody's else's opinion matters in that moment. You just give yourself the opportunity to feel the feelings, whether it's laughter, whether it's sadness, whether it's reflection, whether you want to be around people, whether you want to be alone. Like, there's no right way to grieve. Just grieve in your way, and own it is the best that you can.
One of the ways that is very important that that I coped in the early days. I actually coped as it was leading up to his passing, and I still cope this way today. Growing up, my dad had this tendency to blast music, specifically 80s music, in the car and do karaoke as he was driving. So the hand gestures, the car basically swerving on the road with all of our friends in the back, and he was known as, oh boy, we're gonna ride with Mr. P, and this is gonna be a karaoke taxi here, right?
That's hilarious.
And in the days leading up to his passing, his brain was starting to go as well, and he had tried to create a playlist on Spotify, and the songs that he was selecting were not the songs that he used to really enjoy. So I had started building, I looked at his playlist and I said, these are definitely, like, these are the songs. These are the core songs. And then I started building a playlist in the weeks before he had passed. And in the weeks after, I spent a ton of time refining that playlist. I still listen to that playlist. It's called Dad's Drives. And I still add songs to it once in a while.
That's
So I'll hear one and I'm like, this should have been on the playlist years ago. The Cars, they finally made it the playlist. So
that's awesome. Yeah, that's so interesting. I actually have a playlist that myself and my family created after my dad passed away. And one of the so my dad went to a ton of U2 concerts. And one of the last things that we did together was he came up when I was living in New York, and we went to a U2 concert in New Jersey. And it was super cool. And so there's a lot of U2 on that playlist, and there really aren't a lot of songs, but I listened to it, on the death anniversary, on his birthday, whenever I want to remember him and reflect. It's a great way to, like, music is one of those things that allow you to, like, really reflect and think about the past.
all the time. It's like a time capsule.
Yeah.
Now I have to ask, the U2 fandom, was that before or after they downloaded their playlist to every iPhone in the world? Or every Apple Play?
I don't know. That's not how much of a music person I am. But when it comes to my dad, I'll listen to his songs for sure. How did you talk about your dad, or really want to talk about your dad after he died, and like what shifted? Because it seems like there was an element of his I'm going to call it deterioration happened over a long period of time. And there was an element of, like, he wasn't really solving his own problems, it sounds like, from what you're saying, but also maybe some of it was out of your control. So how do you talk about him, and what shifted?
Yeah, big shift after he passed. Well, he was alive. I didn't want to talk about him. to my friends. There was, growing up especially, there was a lot of embarrassment. I wanted to have the parents that, you know, you came home to and they were your best friends and they had a healthy dinner made and they had the house decorated and everything was clean, and I didn't want to admit that I had a family that was broken. And after he passed out, I was 27. So I was really starting to get my bearings of my own lifestyle. And after he passed, I wanted to talk about him more than I had ever wanted to. It was a complete reverse. But I wanted to make sure that I was talking about the things that were good about him and helpful for other people to know. So today I talk about him casually through various ridiculous stories and funny things he said or done, or the way that he acted, or times where I catch him in myself or in my siblings. So we joke about that all the time. At least weekly, it comes up. And the most important way that I talk about him today now is with my own clients. So something that I hold very near and dear to me is watching clients go through similar situations, sometimes the same situations. I can see it from a much different point of view than I could before. Understanding the difference between giving people space where needed, but also not giving them so much space just to make yourself feel comfortable. So one of the things that was very frustrating is I had individuals in my life that didn't ask about it at all, and I would have to find excuses to bring him up or to share a story. And that I try to make sure my clients and my friends, my colleagues never feel that way. Everybody wants to be there with the I'm sorries in the first week. And then from there, you feel kind of like you're the person who just broke up with their toxic partner, and all you want to do is talk about them, and your friends and family are sick of hearing about it. But by the way, my family was never and is never sick of talking about my dad, but friends, colleagues, coworkers, you feel a little bit like a nuisance.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that I learned, and it applies to our profession specifically, but I had been trained for years that you need to tell your clients that when someone in their family passes away, you need to be their very first phone call and right away. So the step of order is you call your financial advisor and the funeral home director on the same day that someone passes away. And since my dad passed away and I was able to actually experience the way that things work out on a timeline basis and a mental and emotional capacity basis, I tell my clients quite the opposite now. So we go through what I call lifeboat drills. Last year, our lifeboat drill with everyone was actually going through what that first month process looks like if someone in the household passes away. And the most important conversation that I have with them is I let them know you do not need to call us until you are ready. I do tell them, hey, it would be nice to know, like, you can send me a note, you can send me a text message, and we'll start working behind the scenes for you. But in terms of having to know, there is virtually no emergency other than calling the funeral home director, whoever's going to actually handle your loved one's body in the first hours after. There is nothing financial that needs to happen immediately.
I love that. Basically rehearsing the what happens if scenarios and really flipping the script of, hey, your advisor should be one of your first calls to, hey, you really don't need to call us because everything's set in stone and we've rehearsed this. That's really special and gives a lot of people, I'm sure, peace of mind. And I appreciate the way, I think it's super interesting because your family, it seems like, brings him up a lot. In the fact that, like, oh, that's something that dad would do. But you're 100% right. There's a grief cliff maybe it's a week, maybe it's after the funeral or after Shiva or whatever it might be. Maybe it's the first month, but people stop bringing him up because either, maybe they feel weird. Their lives move on. There's people, you can only care so much about so many people. And when you're grieving, when you've experienced that loss, um, you're constantly thinking about that person, whether it's a month or a year or 10 years later, you're still thinking about them. And so you want someone to bring them up as well and remember and reflect. Similar to the breakup, which you mentioned and alluded to, I also, ironically, you went through a breakup of your own. And I think this story is super interesting because I guess my question is, how did it feel moving on from someone who your dad met and gave permission to, knowing that, likely you'll end up with somebody who your dad may never meet?
Yeah. So, yeah, this was a very interesting, a not fun experience, but interesting to go through from this grief perspective. So, about a year and a half after my dad passed away, and when my dad was on his deathbed, there were some conversations that he wanted to make sure were had, and one of those conversations was to let I believe it was my brother, know that the person that I was dating at the time, if they asked to marry me, that he would have said yes. And there were some not fun things that happened in our relationship that definitely steered towards the relationship ending. And it was the first time that I had been through a breakup after my dad had passed. And every other time that I would go through a breakup, he would be the person on the phone that I would call. And my mom was there too, don't get me wrong, but he was the one where he had nothing better to do at that point in time. He wanted to hash it out and get into the details and the nitty gritty and hear all the gossip about it. And I knew in this situation, he would have said, well, that guy's a piece of scum. Like, get rid of him. Like, you're going to be fine. You're way too good for this. And I felt, for the first time during a breakup, so much clarity over what I needed to do. Like, there wasn't the ability to call dad and say, well, let me see what dad's going to say. But I think the clarity there is that every time that I would call him, I already knew what he was going to say. I didn't need to hear it from him anymore.
Yeah. It was already inside of you. The answers were already inside of you.
Make me cry.
That's really special, though, to come to that realization during such a hard time, that you've spent the time with him and you knew what he was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to transition now to the financial section of this podcast, the money section. So immediately after your dad passed, or I guess in the preceding couple of months and years and so on and so forth, financially and logistically, what role did you take on in your family?
This was an interesting one for me. So, leading up to my dad's passing, about 6 years before he passed, I became the financial advisor on his accounts. And everything had gone very smoothly, no issues between the family with that. When he passed away, and we had talked about this previously, we had talked about who he wanted listed as the executor, as his power of attorney, as his healthcare proxy. Side note on the healthcare proxy, I asked very specifically not to be listed as his healthcare proxy because I did not feel comfortable making that decision. That's a really, really important notation that needs to be, a conversation that needs to be had with a healthcare proxy ahead of time. But
And
after,
a healthcare proxy is the pull the plug document or any medical decisions.
yes, the pull the plug document. I did not want to be on that one. But the executor he chose to be my sister, the oldest daughter, the oldest sibling between the three of us, makes total sense. There is a difficult dynamic that exists between siblings, especially when they have those age differences. So I am the youngest sibling. I am a financial advisor by nature, and I help clients go through estate closings all the time. At that point in time, I had been doing it for about eight years. But at the end of the day, I do have a sister that is 7 to 8 years older than me. And her husband took the reins on distributing the estate. What I wanted to make sure happened, among all other things, is that as a family, we were able to keep happy and healthy relationships between us.
Mm-hmm.
And what I knew was not going to be helpful was for me to try to get involved and tell them exactly how everything was going to play out. Though I may know the information, we all have more type A personalities where we don't like to be told what to do, how to make things as easy as possible. So I really purposefully had to take a hands-off approach with it. It was hard. It was really hard. I would hear not complaints, but comments about, oh, this process is taking forever, and then we have to go down and we have to do this, and then we have to get this document signed. And really just trying not to comment on any of it, to let them take the reins with it. One of the actually two more difficult decisions that needed to be made in this process as a family, and I know I was part of the recommendation for this too. My dad had expressed that he wanted some old family stocks to go to my nephew, and had also expressed that he wanted the house to go to my brother. His will distributed everything out in equal shares 3 ways between us siblings. One of the beautiful things with having a family that's able to really sit back and look at the situation and have 3 siblings and heirs that are in agreement that at the end of the day, what matters is what dad wanted to see happen with this money, is we were able to make that happen through disclaimers. So none of it was written in his will. Any one of us could have chosen to be selfish and say, well, this is my money. The state says that this is my money according to the documents. And none of us did that. So effectively what we did was we submitted disclaimers for me and my sister for the house. So the full value of the house went to my brother. We did not make up for that on any other portions of his estate. And then the stocks, they are an AT&T stock, a Verizon stock, and a Warner Bros. Discovery stock. Those were all 3 from my grandfather, who actually worked on the telephone lines in New York City back when you would see the big coils. He was given those stocks, and they were passed down and down to generations. They went 100% to my nephew. And that is something that still sits with me today. So my nephew is my brother's son. He was my father's only grandchild at the time. The difficulty in that is knowing that there could be a day where I have children and or my sister has children, and they were not a part of that. So it's something that I don't know if it was right or if it was wrong. The fact of the matter is that was his only grandchild that he ever got to meet. And he doesn't know if there will be grandchildren in the future. So I know that he made the best decision that he could, knowing the information he knew at the time. But it is something that I wonder if I'll look back 10 years from now and say, we messed up with that.
So when did these conversations happen about the house and about the stocks? Was that part of the deathbed conversations as he was talking about, your partner and potentially marriage, or is it like, how did you set aside that intentional time to have those conversations?
Yeah. The beauty in being someone's financial advisor, those are the conversations that we have with our clients, including my parents, who I both had the honor of being their financial advisor. So those are conversations that we had in the years leading up to his passing. I did want a more airtight a set of estate documents for him. We could not bring that into fruition back to his uncanny ability to push things off. So everything was distributed exactly according to a simple will in New York State. But at least the goals were talked about. And even without the documents, as long as all of the heirs want to honor those goals, you can still make it happen. It wasn't perfect. So yeah, those ones were conversations that had happened over time. The specific stock decision to the grandchild, that one was one that happened a little bit later, maybe in the months leading up to his passing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a decision that I believe was made more out of that, I don't want to deal with these stocks, so let's just put an answer to it.
So you were able to put, put an answer to it, but yeah, you would have liked a more airtight estate solution. All of it written out, bequests of the house and the stocks and everything else gets split.
Yes, so I'm a big proponent of having special needs language in a trust for possible future generations. So what that says is basically if something happens to the beneficiary of this trust, medically, mentally, and they may need to apply for any sort of state-driven benefits, Medicaid insurance can be the most common of those. That anything that they receive in an inheritance will not disinherit or will not disbar them from being able to receive those benefits. And we have some members in our family where, that situation could and does apply at times. And I had pushed really hard about 4 years before he had passed. I had him meet with an attorney in town that I know, like, and trust. And he looked at the cost of redoing the documents and said, I'll think about it. I don't really want to do that. So at the end of the day, his assets did get distributed in a format that does become an issue for applying for those more affordable health insurance plans for certain individuals. So it definitely wasn't perfect.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was pretty amicable between your siblings for the most part. If somebody has intrafamily complications or a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different type A people, what advice would you give when settling an estate when there's, maybe one or two people in charge and there is an emotional tie to maybe a home or maybe specific stocks or aspects?
I have to admit, the distribution wasn't perfect, and I think about this situation all the time, so I should share it. So I was the financial advisor on his investment accounts. He had a taxable account that needed to be split 3 ways. So there were stock holdings in there, and when you were splitting stock shares with the company that we were with at the time, there was a letter of instruction that had to be typed up by my office's team that said, please split these stocks, each stock holding 3 ways. And if dividends, so quarterly income payments, typically quarterly, that come from those stocks, between the time that this letter is submitted and the time that you process it, if any dividends are sent to the account, please send them to, and we had to name an individual. And then we also had to say any fractional shares of those stocks, if they cannot be split evenly 3 ways, please split the fractional shares and send them to name individual.
Mm-hmm.
And in that letter of instruction, and I don't remember which party went where, but I named my brother for one of them and my sister for the other. And we each had to, as the beneficiaries, we had to sign these forms. So everybody saw that form go through. And my sister saw the form and flipped her wagon. She did not understand why my brother was getting this. It was a whole an issue that became complex. And when it comes down to it, we were talking less than $10 difference.
Mm-hmm.
So even with the most amicable family member distributions through an estate, money does really weird things to people that you would not expect. In terms of advice on how to handle it, just sitting back and trying to be as patient as possible and using that filter of, at the end of the day, this isn't money that we earned necessarily. What would that person really want to see? And I can place bets over 90% of the time the primary thing that that person who passed away would have wanted is to make sure at all costs that what they leave behind does not cause relationships to be damaged.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. That's what most people want. How to honor their legacy, and I think, at least my personal opinion, is that if you can put as much of it in writing as possible to leave and alleviate the heirs and beneficiaries from having to make the decisions themselves while they're grieving, that is part of your legacy. And by not doing that, that's also part of your legacy.
Yeah, I see a lot of arguments happen for various families over details that you might not expect. Things like, okay, how would this person want their body disposed of or taken care of after they pass? Where assets go. And one of the beautiful things that we had in our experience, and I thank my lucky stars all the time, that week that we had to sit in hospice with him, we went through so many things that most family members don't get to go through. So while my dad had spent his entire life putting off these conversations, outside of me forcing him to have them in our financial planning meetings, but we got to have some of those conversations ahead of time. So this is going to sound really weird, and at the time it felt really weird, but looking back, it was the most beautiful blessing we could have asked for. My sister asked my dad to help us write his obituary, and he did. So my sister pre-wrote it, and she went through the whole thing, and he gave it his blessing and approval, and we know that what we put out is exactly what he would have wanted. Like, for example, he really wanted people to know that he graduated from Archbishop Malloy High School.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not positive why, but he got to have that in his obituary.
That's special. That's really cool, because that's also him speaking to you after he's no longer here physically. That's him speaking to you through his obituary, his words, even though he's no longer physically here, which is super special. You alluded to this a couple of times, but you are your parents' financial advisor. What's that like? How do you separate family and money with, financial decisions and the technical side?
It's a tough one. It's a role not a lot of people get to have. I'm honored and blessed that I do. One of the filters I always have to put on first and foremost is, just because I have a family member who is a client of mine, it doesn't mean that I can treat them any less importantly than the rest of my clients. And I know that sounds backwards, but when we are doing reviews and making sure that we're having conversations, when I meet with my mom today, I still meet with, when we get in that meeting room, we are talking about her financials. We are not talking about the family dramas, about anything else. We are hitting all of those agenda points. When I go to, rebalance or reallocate clients' portfolios, I'm making sure that her portfolio is being treated exactly the same as the rest of my clients. So I never want to look at it as, well, it's my mom, she'll never fire me. at the end of the day, I need to make sure that she is in the hands of the best financial advisor, in my opinion, that I could put in front of her. So that's number one, is actually treating it backwards and making sure that I'm treating a family member as a client. And then number two is when we make decisions financially that I know could be questions later. So every piece of detail, and it goes for all of my clients, but it's especially so for my own family members. If it's a question that's going to come up after she passes as to why things were done the way that they were, and we make a decision around that, I ask my mom for the permission to talk to my siblings about it. So for example, we were going through looking at the possibility of getting a long-term care insurance policy in New York State. And the cost of doing that is not cheap. We've run the numbers. We're able to make it happen. It's a decision, right? We don't know how things will pan out for her. And it's a decision that you could easily look back and say that was the wrong one. You could also look back and say that it was the right one.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, before we implement anything, I'm actually showing my siblings the numbers, why I think it makes sense or doesn't make sense, and even the options that don't make sense. I will still have a conversation with them to say, hey, I looked at this, it doesn't make sense, but just so that you know I looked at it. So it's just that additional layer.
Is there a weird dynamic of Kay is my daughter and she is the one giving me advice, like now becoming the parent?
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask her for
Okay.
that. What I can say, and it's a line that I have really come to love with my clients. I think there's been this theory for a long time that as a financial planner or just a financial service professional for anyone, that your clients work for you, and that your time is so valuable that you may not have time for all your clients. Your clients might not have enough money with you to be calling you all the time. And it's something I tell my clients all the time. I say, I work for you. At the end of the day, I work for you. And I tell my mom that too in this scenario. So it really goes for every client. You're choosing who you have working for you and your money. So as it relates to that specific relationship, I don't know if it's switched the dynamic from child to parent on that.
Mm-hmm.
My job is just to put information in front of her so that she can make the decision. I'm really not making decisions for her.
Makes sense. Talk about the moment where everything shifted for you, and how you used the money in your inheritance.
Yeah, this is a fun one. It's actually how I ended up right in this office, even though we're in a virtual studio, the office that I'm in right now. So my dad made the decision to be cremated, and with that week that I told you about, he made a list of places that I needed to take his ashes. Specifically me for this list. Some of those places, you can actually have a lifetime ban put on you should you drop them off there. So I'll try not to mention some of those. They're fun ones. They're not morbid in any way. But long story short, from
Mention
there,
the places.
what'd you say?
You said mention the places.
Again.
One fun one, but continue your story.
I'll mention one. So one of the places he really wanted to take me wanted me to take his ashes was to Disney World. That's the one where you can end up with a lifetime ban if you get caught. So I was down on that heist 2 weeks after he passed. It was such a close timeline that my mom actually had to have his cremains mailed down to Florida for me. It was 2 weeks after his passing. I had not been back to work yet. I had planned this trip and said, when I get back from this trip, I'm going to come back. And I was with a firm that I really liked. I had been with them for about 8 years. And I got a call from a professional that I've known since my beginning in the industry. And the phone call went something like, hey, Kay, we really like what you've been doing all these years. Do you know anyone similar to you that would be willing to buy one of our partners out, a female advisor? And I was so loyal to my old company that I said, let me get back to you. I'll think of some options. I'll call you in the next few days. And right after that, I got a phone call from my current, my at the time current boss. He said, hey, I got a call from Kevin, is the business partner who called me. He's my business partner today. He said, I got a call from Kevin, and I have to say I would be a bad friend if I didn't tell you to at least look at this opportunity. And I hung up the phone and I'm like, this is something I would absolutely never do when my dad was still alive. The difference is that I had not a large inheritance, but I had a small sum of money to say, if I change companies and this all goes to hell, I've got a pool of money that I can sit back on for a second, regroup, and figure out what I'm doing next. And I've never had this opportunity before. And I was in that blur of grief. It lasted for me about a year and a half, but that blur of grief where I just sat there and said, you know what? Life's going to take me where it takes me. And I was seeing signs of my dad everywhere left and right, and I couldn't see it any other way. Like, he's pulling some strings up there. This is an opportunity that does not come around for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I called Kevin back and I said, let's do it. And it's been 4, almost 5 years since then. And I own my practice today, which is really cool and incredible to say. But since then, there have been so many times where big decisions have come up and I'm looking at all of the circumstances and it's like life is telling me what to do. And I'd never had that feeling before.
It's like a guiding North Star that's no longer, like, you know, your dad's no longer here, but he's still guiding you in that. And to see him in those decisions, that's really special. And I don't think it happens for everybody. I think, you know, there's been many decisions in my life where I'm like, Dad, can you give me a sign? And, you know, just like we talked about before, everything that he's taught you is inside of you and leading you down the path that you're going. It's really special.
Yeah, it's an interesting feeling. One of the things I do want to make sure just to get out there, one of my big, oh my gosh, moments in my grief journey too. I was 27 when my dad passed, and I know you were even younger going through that. And I think my first, like, what am I going to do realization came about a month and a half after he passed. I realized there's such a high likelihood that I will live longer without him than the time that I ever lived with him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an interesting way to look at it for me, where I sit there and I say, like, okay, yes, this might be like what Dad would do, but also I have to look at this and say, like, this is my life and I know how his life played out. And I want to make sure that I learn from the way that his played out. Yeah. And I'm able to live a better life. And I am able to because of a lot of the values that he passed down.
That's special. Yeah, that's that realization of, hey, or actualization when it does come is, hey, I'm probably gonna live longer than without my dad than with them. It's kind of it's a weird feeling. And then it's also like, well, how do I honor the time that I had with them and like they embody everything that you do, or you embody everything that they are in your just choices and decisions. Okay, looking back on everything that we talked about, what do you wish you would have known or done differently in preparing for your dad's loss and your grief journey?
I wish I would have spent more time actually with him. And I know everyone says that, but in his own grief journey, It was a constant. It was like having a pager on us at all times. Were we going to get a call that he's going back to the hospital, or that he's infected again, was what we would call it. So he would call me and he'd be really emotional. And it had gotten so common that and my family still jokes about this as siblings. My sister and my brother will say, Kay, you were always the first one that could tell when dad was having an infection, because he would call and he would be emotional. And I would say, Dad, I think you need to go to the hospital. Like, I think you're infected. And then 3 days later, he'd end up in the hospital.
Mm.
And going through that so many times, I became really numb to it, where he would end up in the hospital and I wouldn't go to see him every time. It was just too common. And even when I would, it was like a chore. It was awful. And I wish that I would have looked at the world and his situation differently than I do now. So he was in my hometown of Owego, New York, Tioga, New York, which is outside of that. It really didn't have and doesn't have a lot of resources for people that are blind, are not super mobile, can't drive on their own any longer. And we had talked about it for some time, moving him up to Rochester. And the hesitation there was always, well, if he moves up to Rochester, then I'm going to have to spend more time with him. And my life is just going to be running his life. And looking back, I wish I would have taken advantage of that. And there is still a huge loss in that I didn't, because I run into clients and colleagues and friends or friends of friends who end up in his situation up here in Rochester. And though I have access to a lot of those resources from professional points of contact, I still don't know the ins and outs of how to help someone thrive in that scenario, because his mind never left. He was still young and spry mentally, but physically his body was falling apart, and it really isolated him. And I would love to have found a way to not isolate him. And today I struggle because I'm always looking for ways to make sure that we're not isolating people who are aging, even if they're aging healthy and they're just getting older, or people who are ill. And I every time that I think about how I'm going to solve that societal phenomenon, I feel this pit in my stomach, just full of guilt over the way that I treated or didn't treat my dad.
Yeah. And on that note, what resources do you wish you would have had, or what financial, logistical, and emotional resources did you use to help with everything that we've been talking about, really?
Yeah, I still don't have those resources today. If I could wave a magic wand, there would be a resource that is more palatable and friendly for ride sharing for people who have medical issues. I know that there's Medicab and things like that. The services are not great. It's not easy to navigate around. But just having, a community driven place for individuals who, they're not 89 years old. Not saying that there's anything wrong with an 89-year-old or a 90-year-old or an 80-year-old, but they're younger. My dad was 62 when he passed, and he was in a community home with a bunch of people who were decades older than him.
Mm-hmm.
So having the ability to access a resource where you can bring people going through the same thing together for them to be able to relate, something that I'm still missing today.
Yeah. And what, you mentioned you listen to a lot of grief podcasts even before this, and read literature around it. So what resources helped you through the emotional and the financial part of your journey?
I don't know if I'm allowed to mention in another podcast, but I will. It's not running anymore, but the episodes are great. Nora McInerney has a podcast called Terrible Thanks for Asking. I have listened to every single episode. I was listening to her podcast when my dad was actively very, very sick, which was those were my darkest times, really. And then another resource that I actually first started utilizing it for clients and then realized that how much it applies to my own life and has with my dad's passing, friends passing, other family members passing. Amy Florian has a great set of books on dealing with grief. She's got just tons of great actionable information. So one of the things that caught me off guard when I first became a financial planner is how many funerals you will end up attending. And that was the first time that I opened her book. I had to go to a funeral for a client at my old firm, and I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to write in the card. So I started studying her stuff at that point in time. But when it came to play for me, it didn't help me navigate being the person grieving, but it did help me understand exactly the flow of how people are going to act and treat you. So, that first Facebook post had a wall of I'm sorries. And it's something that I still struggle with today. I'll bring up, oh, yep, my dad passed away about 5 years ago, and almost 5 years ago in 2 months. And the first thing someone says is, I'm sorry. And I still don't know how to react to that. I think what I most commonly say now is thank you. And I don't know if it's appropriate.
Yeah.
So any resources you have, I will certainly take too.
I say I appreciate that and then move on quickly. But yeah, Amy Florian's book is no longer awkward, and I will tag it to the show notes as well as Terrible Thanks for Asking.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, we can cross promote other podcasts because even on the currency of grief, we don't have all the answers and all the resources. Not yet, anyway. As we wrap up the podcast, how has your experience changed your approach to your life and planning?
Yeah. So how has it changed my life? It's still changing my life today. I went through a big period of really looking at my relationships as it relates to not just romantic relationships, but friendships as well, and being able to actually sit back and say, is this bringing me joy? I believe that there are a ton of people out in the world that are great people, but may not be the best friends to you. And we only have the capacity to be friends with so many people. You even mentioned it earlier, and being able to see the bigger picture in things since this journey and look back and say, at the end of the day, it does not matter. I used to want to be the person that had the most friends. And now it's really just that quality friendship. And in that too, I've realized I only have so much bandwidth myself. So I find that my relationships with other people, I want them and need them to be more intentional, which, actually sitting down and not just forming relationships with people because it's fun or convenient, but instead having the real conversation. So when I notice that a friend is down about something, instead of just brushing it off like I normally would, I've actually, over the past year and a half or so, I found myself saying, you know what, I'm just going to reach out, make sure that they're okay. And my most common thing, and I think that it's the most helpful thing to do, is I'll just say, hey, I'm coming over. We don't even have to talk about anything. I'm going to sit on your couch. We're just going to be here together. There doesn't have to be a solution about these things. And most importantly with that, just being there to let people know your troubles and talking about them are never too much for me to listen to. Like, it doesn't take me energy to listen to what's going on for you. And previous to that, and I did it with my own dad, where I just said, I'm too busy for this. I don't have time to deal with this right now. And I would brush people off. And I've really learned to approach life a little bit differently. And along with that, actually just appreciating the normalcies that happen in life. Like, not everything has to be this social media post worthy event.
Why not? What do you mean?
I know.
That's crazy.
I know. So yeah, just really
mundane
surrounding
times, like
myself
the
with.
just slow and like going over and sitting on someone's couch and watching TV or not talking about, obviously having the intentional conversations while also leaving the space for just enjoyment. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, there was a point in time where I definitely shied away from anyone that was going through grief, especially the death of someone that they loved. I had no idea how to handle it, so I just wouldn't talk about it. My favorite line to use with people now when they have someone that has passed away, I don't say I'm sorry. Sometimes I'll say, I want to say I'm sorry, and that's not near enough. But I do make sure to tell them I want to hear stories about them when you have time to square out exactly what you want to share.
Yeah, that's really special. And that's another part of this podcast is I'm fortunate enough to have the space to ask about the stories of your dad and our other guests, people and their stories. So, and talk about, your health and distributing your health and your wealth.
Sure. I'm really big on a work-life balance. As of recent, it's been a little off kilter, just some business things going on, but I believe very, very strongly in having that work-life balance. So for all of our team members in the office, I don't want them working overtime. When they step away from work, I want them to be able to step away under the guise that I can do the same. So we work to live. We do not live to work. I like to make sure that when we are working, things are done as efficiently and effectively as they possibly can be, so that we can step away. From a life standpoint and a health standpoint, sorry for anyone listening on this podcast, I am sorry to admit I am an avid CrossFitter. CrossFit for me, when I left college, I had been playing volleyball for so long, and it was something that my dad really took pride in. So stepping away from that, I didn't have anything to be competitive in anymore. And I still play beach volleyball, but I was no longer growing. And for so long, I had been growing where I could sit there and say, like, I'm so proud that I can do something that I couldn't do yesterday, that my body's able to learn all of these new movements. And in CrossFit for me right now, that's been my latest, like, I'm learning all of these things, and maybe CrossFit won't be my answer for forever. But right now it is. And I know, Justin, you and I had shared in our meeting last month that we all have some goals for this year. So I will be competing in a high rocks race in Las Vegas in a few weeks. So we'll see if that takes over the reins from there. But health wise, I've always got it in my mind that we've got to appreciate our bodies while we have them. I watched my dad's deteriorate in front of him, and he didn't listen to his body. So I like to keep my athleticism, my strength, my bone density, all of those things, and stay out of the hospital as much as possible.
Even with all these competitions.
Yes.
No, that's amazing and super special that, it makes sense, right? Seeing your dad go through his journey and wanting to take care of your health and be proactive about your health and your planning and your wealth is obviously very important to you. And also what's very important from our past conversations is travel adventure, and also from a death standpoint, cremation. And so talk about how you honor your dad through travel adventure and all of that.
Yeah. So one of the answers I did get definitely for my own life from my dad is he made the decision to be cremated when he passed away. And In having that week that I mentioned earlier, where he gave me a list of places that he wanted to be taken, I have fulfilled all of those, I believe. I should go back and look at the list that I wrote down, but I believe those are all complete. Actually, one of my favorite ones, he wanted to be taken over Niagara Falls, so I completed that first Father's Day that he passed away. We went by boat to the top of Niagara Falls, and there it went. But now I have, yeah, there he went, swimming down the falls. But now I kind of have an open book as it relates to traveling and places that I want to take him. And a fun fact that I think that you'll appreciate, it's quite a morbid process of carrying ashes around with you whenever you travel. So I had to find the right container for traveling with them, and I thought it would be a fun idea. He actually travels in a sprinkles container so that he is always ready for the party. So whenever I go traveling, you will hate to know this, but whenever I go traveling, I usually have a little bit of him with me just in case he's got to get dropped off anywhere. So we'll see how that goes. I'm doing my first international trip this spring, and I've never traveled internationally with his cremains, so I don't know what'll be happening there, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, you've never traveled internationally with a sprinkles container, so.
Yeah. What I will share, sorry to interrupt, what I will share is the answer that it gave me was that I absolutely want to be cremated. The experience that he has given me and being able to share and continue making memories that I feel like are with him has been incredible.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's not every time I go see my dad in his burial site in a grave site. It does. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go see dad. Like, it's gonna be super joyous, and then you go and you're kind of just there, and it doesn't always provide the joy that it's definitely more somber of an experience. But I can, if we were to spread some of his ashes or remains on the water or internationally or Niagara Falls, like all of that is a really, really nice way to honor your dad. So I appreciate you sharing that. So my last question is, I want you to imagine 27-year-old youngest child who has been embarking on an 11-year journey with her dad. And unfortunately, that journey has ended. What would you say to this 27-year-old person who just lost their dad?
I don't know if this is appropriate, but it gets better from here. Which sounds really inappropriate. I would do anything to have him for longer. And I think primarily when I say that, I wish I had him healthier for longer. But so many parts of me opened up in my grief journey. The ability and willingness to share about him and talk about him has made me a better person. And to actually look back at the person that he was. So when he passed away, it was like a story had ended, and I could then read that book and open that book and say, okay, what made him the person that he was? How do I learn from that? And for some reason, without that hard stop and that grief that was caused for me, I almost wasn't looking at him as a person to learn from so much. It was like there was just damage being done all over with his illness. And when that door was closed and I could actually release a lot of the tension and the energy that came with that illness and that not knowing when this chaos is going to end, I could actually learn and grow. I wish I would have known how much of a more well-rounded person I would become because of it, because of him.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we talked about and you wrote as well is that you explored that side of you. You didn't run away from it. You dove in and allowed the feelings, the reflections to play a part in who you are from this moment going forward.
Yeah, and a part of that exploration process for me, up until he passed, I didn't want to take any of the parts of him with me.
Mm,
And in his passing, I felt it an opportunity where I have to carry this person's legacy. And so I look for parts of him in me and I carry it with me, and it's built me into this different person. So, like, just the simple, mundane, or like crazy things that happen in life. I was never someone that liked dancing at a wedding. And for me now, it's like, oh, who cares? Because that was who my dad was who cares what other people think?
mhm.
And I recognize how right he was in that. And I actually feel it too. I'm like, I don't care if I'm a bad dancer. Like, I'm 32 years old. Who am I trying to impress at this wedding, right? Um, so I think that was the big shift that happened is it's no longer my dad building his story, but it's me now taking the story that he built and carrying that on in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an incredible shift and really evident in everything that you shared today. And I really appreciate you sharing that reflection and realization in your journey. This has been another incredible episode of The Currency of Grief. Kay, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me, Justin. To be honest, I feel like I've learned so much just being a part of this podcast today. So I want to say truly from the bottom of my heart, thank you for having me on it.
Pleasure's all mine. I really appreciate it. And I know our audience, or many, many, many listeners will take a lot out of this episode. So, podcast family, thank you so much again for joining us on today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Kay's story. And don't forget, it's a great day to have a great day. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.